Most people will never see this. Not because it's hidden, not because it's locked behind some exclusive access or secret transmission, but because the quantum field operates on a principle that mainstream science has been slowly confirming for decades without fully accepting what it means. Not every configuration of consciousness can receive every category of information. The field doesn't withhold. It reveals selectively, not by choice, but by resonance. The same way a radio tower doesn't choose who receives its signal. It broadcasts at a specific frequency and only the receivers calibrated to that frequency pick it up. Everyone else gets static. You are not getting static right now. The fact that this video reached you, that out of everything available to your attention in this moment, you stopped here, that something in you recognized this before your conscious mind had assembled a reason, is not luck. It is calibration. Your receiver is tuned to a frequency most people never reach, not because they lack the capacity, but because the calibration requires something they haven't been willing to do. We're going to name exactly what that is. But before we go further, drop one word in the comments. The word that comes up when you ask yourself, what is the field trying to show me right now? Don't think. The first word. That word is already part of what this video is revealing. There's a specific kind of experience that nobody around you has adequate language for. You've tried to describe it? Maybe once, maybe several times to people you trusted. And what you got back was either polite dismissal, that's an interesting way to look at it, or genuine confusion, the kind that tells you the person isn't being resistant. They simply don't have the reference point. They've never felt what you're describing because what you're describing requires a specific configuration of perception to access. Here is what that experience actually is. You perceive layers. Not visually, not literally, but informationally. When you walk into a situation, you're not just reading the surface. You're reading the field underneath it. The unspoken dynamic beneath the spoken words. The trajectory a thing is moving toward before the evidence has made it obvious. The emotional history of a space before anyone has explained it to you. This isn't intuition in the casual sense. Neuroscientist Carl Friston's predictive processing framework explains that the brain generates a model of reality and updates it based on incoming signal. But what most researchers don't discuss is that the quality of information available to that model depends entirely on the sensitivity of the instrument doing the perceiving. A more coherent nervous system operating with less internal noise accesses signal that a less coherent one filters out entirely. You're not imagining the extra layer. You're running a more sensitive instrument, and a more sensitive instrument in a world calibrated for the average often feels like a liability before it feels like an advantage. The field revealed itself to you specifically because your instrument can handle what it shows. Before the field reveals anything, it builds the receiver. That building process is not comfortable. It looks like disruption. It feels like loss. It presents itself as the things that didn't work. The relationships that ended without clean resolution. The phases where the life you were constructing on the surface kept refusing to hold its shape, no matter how carefully you built it. Most people interpret this as evidence that something is wrong with them. That they're doing it incorrectly. That if they just found the right method, the right understanding, the right framework, the construction would finally stick. David Bohm said something precise about this. The implicate order, the deep structure underlying visible reality, doesn't move through linear accumulation. It moves through what he called enfoldment and unfoldment. Things fold inward, become invisible, disappear from the surface, and then they unfold, emerge at a higher level of complexity than the form they held before the folding. What looked like collapse was enfoldment. What felt like loss was the field taking back the form so it could return as something the previous form couldn't have contained. Every version of your life that didn't hold was the field refusing to let you stabilize at a frequency too small for what it was building you toward. You're still here, which means the unfoldment is what you're inside of right now. Notice that in your body for a moment. Not as concept, as something that's actually true about your actual history. That slight shift, that quiet but unmistakable recognition. That's the field confirming what it already knows about you. Here is something worth sitting with. The field doesn't reveal the same thing twice in the same way. Not because the information changes, because the receiver does. Every time you access a new layer of what the field is showing you, the instrument doing the perceiving has been altered by the access itself. The you that understands something is not the same configuration as the you that didn't understand it yet. And the new configuration opens access to a layer that the previous one couldn't perceive. Which is why people who have been doing this work for years keep encountering revelations that feel as significant as the first one. The depth doesn't run out. The instrument keeps becoming capable of more. Karl Pribram's holonomic brain theory proposed that perception isn't a localized event. Consciousness participates in a field that extends beyond individual neural architecture. The deeper you go into genuine field awareness, the more what you receive feels less like learning and more like remembering, as if the information was always present, and the only thing that changed was your ability to finally read it. You are at a specific depth right now. Tonight, and there is a layer available to you at this depth that wasn't accessible before you reached it. What that layer contains, and why the field withholds it from configurations of consciousness that haven't done the work to hold it, is what this video is moving toward. Stay with this. The part most people never reach is coming. I remember the moment I understood that the field had been revealing itself to me the entire time I was convinced it was silent. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It happened during something ordinary, sitting with coffee early in the morning before anything had started, before the day had any demands on it. I was going through a period where everything I'd built felt like it was in the process of dissolving. Not collapsing dramatically, just quietly, persistently becoming less solid, less mine. Like something I'd been holding for a long time was being gently removed from my hands by something I couldn't argue with. And in that stillness, I noticed something I'd been too busy to notice before. The field had been communicating the entire time. Every moment of unexpected clarity, every decision that turned out to be precisely right for reasons I couldn't have explained when I made it, every conversation that arrived containing exactly what I needed to hear before I knew I needed to hear it. Every impulse I'd followed without knowing why that led somewhere the logical path would never have found. I had been receiving transmission constantly. I'd been interpreting it as coincidence, as luck, as the ordinary noise of a life that happened to sometimes go well. The revelation wasn't that the field started speaking, it was that I finally stopped calling it something else. What the field reveals to you has always been in the signal. The question has always been whether you're willing to call it what it is. Subscribe and turn on notifications. What's opening in this channel goes into depths that a single video can't contain. And the orientation you need for where you're going requires the continuation. Join me on Patreon and check my quantum guides in the link in description. It may help you. My deepest work is there. Here's what the field reveals to the consciousness that has earned the access. Reality is not being done to you. It is being generated through you. Not in the motivational sense. Not as a belief system about positive thinking or the law of attraction. In the precise, mechanically specific sense that quantum field theory describes, the observer and the observed are not separate events. The consciousness perceiving a situation is participating in the construction of what that situation is. This is not metaphor. The double-slit experiment, replicated thousands of times under controlled conditions, demonstrates that the act of observation physically alters the behavior of quantum particles. Not symbolically. Literally. The measurement changes the phenomenon. The observer is not outside the system. The observer is a variable in the system. Most people hear this and apply it as a technique. They try to observe differently to perceive abundance instead of scarcity, to hold the right thoughts with the right feeling. And most of the time it doesn't work. Not because the principle is wrong. Because they're applying it at the wrong level. The observer that changes the field is not the conscious mind choosing what to think. It is the entire coherent state of the consciousness doing the perceiving. A nervous system operating from fear generates a fearful observer. A nervous system operating from genuine field coherence generates an observer whose perception collaborates with the field rather than defending against it. The field reveals this to you, not everyone. Because you've already begun the work of building that coherence. You haven't completed it, but you've begun it. And the beginning is the credential. Write in the comments, the field reveals through me, not to me. Say it once out loud before you write it. Notice the difference in how it lands in the body. That difference is the entire gap between receiving and participating. The field leaves specific signatures in the life of someone it's actively revealing itself through. The first is a pattern of precise timing. Not everything going right, things arriving at exactly the right moment. A conversation that couldn't have been arranged happening naturally. Information surfacing precisely when it becomes relevant. A door closing in the same week a different one opens with a logic that only becomes visible in retrospect, but is unmistakable when you look back. The second signature is an increasing sensitivity to dissonance. As the field opens more of itself to you, the gap between aligned and misaligned becomes more perceptible. Decisions that used to feel neutral start carrying a distinct signal. A contraction or an expansion that registers in the body before the mind has assembled an opinion. You stop needing to think your way to the right answer. You start feeling your way there, and then thinking confirms it. The third signature is what I call information compression. You start understanding things faster than the information being presented should allow. You finish a sentence before it's finished. You grasp the core of something before the explanation is complete. Not because you've heard it before, because the field is running ahead of the transmission. And a fourth, an increasing sense that what you're doing matters beyond what it produces. The work, the creation, the contribution. It starts to feel less like building a life and more like participating in something larger that is using your particular configuration to accomplish something it couldn't accomplish any other way. If 3 or more of these are present in your current experience, you are not approaching field revelation. You are inside it. The question is whether you're treating it as signal or still explaining it away. Subscribe. What we're building on this channel is the ongoing orientation for exactly this territory. There is a specific reason the field doesn't reveal the same depth to everyone. It's not about worthiness. The field doesn't operate on a merit system. It operates on a coherent system. What you can receive is determined by what your instrument can hold without collapsing the signal back into noise. Most people's nervous systems, when they approach the level of field awareness that's available to you right now, activate the threat response. The expansion feels dangerous to a system calibrated for a smaller range of experience. The certainty feels arrogant to a mind trained to doubt. The knowing that arrives without logical assembly feels unreliable to an intelligence that has been taught to only trust what it can explain. So, the nervous system contracts. The aperture closes. The signal that was briefly available narrows back to the bandwidth the system considers safe. This is not failure. It is the automatic behavior of an instrument protecting itself from a frequency it hasn't yet been trained to hold. What alignment actually means, real alignment, not the conceptual version, is the process of expanding that tolerance. Of training the instrument to remain open at depths that previously triggered the contraction. Not by forcing it, by giving it repeated structured experience of holding the frequency safely until the nervous system accepts it as non-threatening. What you want from the field, and what the field wants to give you, is already matched in frequency. The only gap is the instrument's current tolerance for holding that frequency without collapsing. That gap is closable, and closing it is the most important work available to you right now. When the instrument expands to hold the field signal without contracting, when field coherence becomes the baseline rather than the peak state, what becomes available is specific and measurable. Decisions become qualitatively different, not because you gain access to information others don't have, because you stop filtering available information through a nervous system that's defending against what it might reveal. The full signal reaches the instrument. The full instrument responds. The decisions that emerge from this state have a different character. They feel less like choices and more like recognitions. The quality of connection changes. Other people's fields become more legible, not their thoughts, their coherent state. You start perceiving who someone actually is beneath the presentation they're maintaining. This makes manipulation functionally impossible and genuine connection feel like a completely different category of experience than what most people call relationships. Creative output accelerates in ways that are difficult to explain before you experience them. The observer effect applies to creative work exactly as it applies to quantum particles. The quality of attention you bring to the work participates in the formation of the work. Field-coherent attention generates possibilities that noise-filtered attention cannot access. Problems that seemed intractable dissolve, not because you thought harder, but because the instrument thinking them is operating differently. And underneath all of these, the sense of operating from your actual nature rather than a managed approximation of it. The field-coherent consciousness doesn't perform a version of itself. It expresses what it is, and what it is turns out to be more than adequate for everything the life in front of it requires. Here is the deepest layer of what the field reveals to the consciousness that has earned the access. The information you've been receiving, the knowing that arrives before logic, the clarity that surfaces in silence, the transmission you've been calling coincidence is not random. It has a structure, a direction, a coherence that becomes legible once you have the framework to read it. Most of what circulates in the consciousness space about the quantum field is filtered, not deliberately, not through conspiracy, but through the same mechanism that filters all transmitted information. The receiver's capacity shapes what gets passed on. What reaches most people is the version of this knowledge that a mainstream receiver can hold without rejecting it, softened, qualified, made safe enough to not trigger the contraction. What the field actually transmits, unfiltered at the depth where it operates before it gets translated for broad consumption, is more specific, more demanding, and more transformative than the version most people encounter. That is exactly what the Patreon is for. The link is at the top of the description and pinned comment. Click it before you close this. What's in there is not more of this. It's the next layer. Videos and posts that go into the territory this channel can only point at. The unfiltered transmissions, the frameworks that don't get discussed in public content because the audience that can hold them without distorting them is specific. The absolute truth of the quantum field, not the version calibrated for the widest possible reach. If you felt throughout this video that what was being described is something you've already been living. If the validation landed not as new information, but as finally having language for what you already knew. Then what's on the other side of that link was built for you specifically. The field revealed this video to you. It's revealing the Patreon to you now. The top of the description. The link is there. The field doesn't reveal itself to individual consciousness for individual purposes. Rupert Sheldrake's research on morphic fields established something that reframes what personal transformation actually is. When an individual consciousness accesses a new frequency pattern and stabilizes it as a baseline, that pattern becomes more available to the entire field. Not through teaching, not through transmission. Through the basic mechanics of how fields propagate, each node that carries a frequency makes that frequency slightly easier for the next node to access. You are not doing this work for yourself alone. The coherence you're building, the depth of field access you're developing, the willingness to hold the frequency when the instrument wants to contract. All of it contributes to a field that everyone else in your proximity can draw from without knowing they're drawing from it. The person in your life who is closest to this threshold, who has been feeling the hum of something larger without having the framework to trust it, is being held partially by the field you're already generating. Share this with them. Not as content. As a field extension. The act of sending this to exactly the right person is the field directing you, not you making a choice. The word you left in the comments at the beginning of this video, the one the field put in front of your awareness before you had context for it, has a meaning that is clearer now than it was when you wrote it. That's not coincidence. That's the field working in both directions simultaneously, backward through the video you've just watched, and forward into the content you're about to encounter.